I still hear the echo of his grandmother's laughter from his phone, abruptly silenced. Then came the words, cutting deeper than any scream, "A real man knows when to leave a toxic environment." He delivered them with a chilling calm that laid my ugliness bare. That was a week ago, and the silence he left behind is more deafening than any argument. The silence is the first thing you notice. It's a physical entity, a heavy, suffocating presence that has settled into every corner of the apartment. It's been a week since Oren left, and the quiet he left in his wake is more deafening than any argument we ever had. I find myself listening for phantom sounds. The soft, rhythmic scratch of his pencil in a sketchbook, the low rumble of a David Attenborough documentary, the gentle clink of his spoon against the ceramic mug he always used for his chamomile tea. But there's nothing. Only the low, accusatory drone of the refrigerator and the frantic, unsteady rhythm of my own heart, a drumbeat for the single sentence that plays on a relentless loop in my mind. A real man knows when to leave a toxic environment. He didn't shout it, he didn't spit the words with rage. He delivered them with a chilling, surgical calm that sliced through my defenses and laid my ugliness bare. It's that clarity, that absolute finality, that haunts me in the echoing stillness of our no, my apartment. We were together for 3 years. On the surface, we were the couple friends envied. Oren was a man woven from a softer thread than most. He felt everything deeply and without shame. He'd get misty-eyed at a well-shot movie scene, once spending an entire afternoon crafting a splint for a pigeon with a broken wing. He could sense a storm brewing in my mood from a single, clipped sentence. I told everyone and myself that I adored this about him. I labeled his sensitivity kindness, empathy. But if I'm being brutally honest with myself now, in this suffocating silence, a small, dark, and persistent part of me always saw it as a weakness. A flaw in his otherwise perfect design. The men I grew up around were like oak trees, stoic and unyielding. Oren was a willow, beautiful but prone to weeping. I saw his softness not as a virtue to be cherished, but as a project to be managed. I thought I was helping him, building a tougher shell to protect his gentle heart from a harsh world. I thought I was making him stronger. The catalyst for our end was the worst news he'd ever received. His grandmother, his Nana, the woman whose stories were the bedrock of his childhood and whose recipes filled our kitchen with the scent of home, passed away after a short, brutal illness. It was Oren's first real encounter with the jagged edge of loss, the first time a piece of his own history had been ripped away. The grief hit him like a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs and the light from his brilliant green eyes. And I, in my infinite, arrogant stupidity, saw his profound, world-shattering pain as little more than an inconvenience. A test not of his resilience, but of my patience. The funeral was a blur of black clothes and hushed condolences. Oren was a ghost, moving through the motions with a hollowed-out expression that scared me. In the days that followed, he didn't get better. The grief wasn't a storm that passed, it was a fog that settled deep in his bones. He canceled plans with friends, let his commission deadlines slide, and spent his time adrift in our apartment. His grief was a quiet, private affair. He'd sit on the couch for hours, scrolling through old photos on his phone, his thumb tracing the outline of his Nana's smiling face. Sometimes I'd walk in to find him with silent tears tracking paths down his cheeks. At first I tried, I really did. I brought him tea, I made his favorite comfort food, I offered platitudes like she's in a better place and she wouldn't want you to be so sad. They were empty words and I think we both knew it. My comfort felt like a checklist, a series of tasks to perform to get him back to normal. Because his sadness was inconvenient, it disrupted our routine. It made our bright, sunny apartment feel like a tomb. His quiet sorrow was a constant, low-frequency hum of misery that was starting to grate on my nerves. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night. It was the third day since the funeral, and from my perspective, the grieving period had gone on long enough. I wanted to go out to have dinner with friends to feel the pulse of the city again. I wanted my old Oren back. I found him in the living room, sitting in the dark, the faint glow of his phone illuminating his face. He was staring at a video of his Nana, taken last Christmas, her laughter echoing softly in the quiet room. His shoulders were shaking with the force of his suppressed sobs. And something inside me just snapped. The last dregs of my manufactured patience evaporated, replaced by a wave of cold, righteous irritation. This was too much, it was self-indulgent. I walked over not with a comforting touch, but with the rigid posture of a drill sergeant. My voice, when it came out, was sharp and devoid of any warmth, laced with a condescending tone I told myself was tough love. Oren, for God's sake, get a grip, I said, the words hanging in the air like poison. You need to be a man about this, stop crying. The sound of his Nana's laughter from the phone was abruptly silenced as he locked the screen. The quiet that rushed back in was different this time. It was heavy, charged, and terrifying. Oren's shaking shoulders went still. He didn't flinch or get defensive. He simply stopped crying. It was as if I had flipped a switch, plunging a brightly lit, chaotic room into absolute, sterile darkness. The change was so instantaneous it was unnatural. He slowly, deliberately lifted his head. The tear tracks were still glistening on his cheeks, but the eyes that met mine were not the ones I knew. The deep, familiar pools of grief and vulnerability had been drained, and in their place was a calm, clear, and utterly desolate emptiness. It was the look of a landscape after a wildfire has burned everything, trees, undergrowth, life, down to the scorched earth. There was nothing left to ignite, nothing left to save. It was the look of finality. He used the back of his hand to wipe the wetness from his face, a single, unhurried, almost ceremonial gesture. His gaze never left mine. It was a strange, piercing look, not of anger but of assessment. He was seeing me, truly seeing me for the first time. And I suddenly felt transparent. Every ugly, impatient thought I'd ever had about his sensitivity laid bare under that cold, dispassionate stare. I was braced for a fight, for him to yell, to tell me I was a cruel, heartless bitch. I was ready to defend my position, to argue that I was only trying to help him move on, to shake him out of his funk. I had my counterarguments lined up, my justifications polished and ready for deployment, but he offered no fight. He simply held my gaze for a long, silent moment, and in that silence, I felt the entire foundation of our 3-year relationship crack and disintegrate into dust. It wasn't an argument, it was a verdict. Then he spoke. His voice was unnervingly steady, devoid of any inflection, as flat and final as a tombstone inscription. "You're right," he said, the two words cutting through me more effectively than any shout could have. He blinked once, slowly, a gesture of profound and irreversible acceptance. A real man knows when to leave a toxic environment. And with that, he stood up. There was no melodrama. He didn't shove past me or storm off in a theatrical huff. He just rose to his feet with a strange, weightless grace, as if the grief that had been anchoring him for days had suddenly been replaced by a cold, hard resolve. He turned and walked towards the bedroom, his steps measured and silent on the hardwood floor. I was left standing alone in the living room, my heart hammering against my ribs, the echo of his words sealing the air in the room. The words I'd spoken, meant to shock him back to my reality, had instead shocked him into a new one, a reality where I no longer had a place. I heard the distinct final click of the bedroom door closing, a sound that separated before from after, and then the sound that truly began the end. The scrape of his suitcase being pulled from the top of the closet. It was the sound of departure. Panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced through my indignant shock. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He was supposed to argue, maybe even cry more, and then I would comfort him, our dynamic restored with me in the stronger, guiding role. The sound of his methodical packing was a complete system failure. I rushed to the bedroom door, twisting the knob. It was unlocked. The scene inside was one of surreal, quiet efficiency. Oren wasn't frantically throwing things into his suitcase. He was folding his shirts with a calm precision that was more unnerving than any rage could have been. He moved with a detached, focused energy, like a man defusing a bomb or packing for a business trip he'd planned for weeks. "Oren, stop this. This is ridiculous," I started, my voice a little too high, a little too shaky. "You can't just leave over one stupid comment." He didn't look at me. He simply took a stack of perfectly folded t-shirts and placed them neatly in the suitcase. "I'm not leaving over one comment, Jez," he said to his reflection in the closet mirror, his voice still unnervingly flat. "I'm leaving because of what that one comment confirmed." "What did it confirm?" I demanded, following him as he moved to the dresser. "That I care about you. That I don't want to see you wallowing in misery forever." He paused, a pair of socks in his hand, and finally turned to look at me. The emptiness in his eyes was staggering. "It confirmed that you don't respect me, that my feelings are an inconvenience to you, that you see my grief not as something to be shared, but as a weakness to be scolded away." He placed the socks in a side pocket of the bag. "My grandmother just died, the woman who taught me how to be kind. And you chose today of all days to tell me my kindness is unmanly." Every word was a perfectly aimed dart. I opened my mouth to argue, to say he was twisting my words, but nothing came out. For less than an hour, he continued his silent, methodical packing. He gathered his toiletries from the bathroom, unplugged his chargers, and slid his laptop into his backpack. It was a systematic erasure of his presence. When he was done, 2 suitcases and a backpack stood by the door. He had condensed 3 years of a shared life into 3 pieces of luggage. He walked to the door, and I stood there dumbly, a spectator at my own life's demolition. He paused with his hand on the doorknob, and for a fleeting, hopeful second, I thought he might turn back, that this was all just a horribly cruel lesson. He looked at me one last time, and the hollow emptiness in his eyes had been replaced by something that felt almost like pity. "Goodbye, Jezebel." Then the door closed with a soft click, and he was gone. My first reaction wasn't sorrow, but a hot, self-righteous anger. How dare he? How dare he be so dramatic, so final? I grabbed my phone, my thumbs flying across the screen. "That was an insane overreaction. You're punishing me for trying to help you." The message sent, a moment later, a small notification appeared beneath it, not delivered. My blood ran cold, I tried again. Not delivered, he had blocked my number, I switched to WhatsApp. A single gray tick blocked, my fingers trembled as I opened Instagram. I searched for his profile. User not found. The anger evaporated, replaced by a tidal wave of pure, undiluted panic. This wasn't a tantrum, this was an amputation. The next few days blurred into a desperate, frantic cycle of denial and panic. I was living inside a self-destructive loop, convinced that if I just tried the right combination of words, the right angle of apology, I could crack the code and undo what I had done. I emailed him long, rambling messages, 1 minute begging for forgiveness, the next accusing him of being cruel and unforgiving. Each email was met with the same digital void. They vanished unanswered into cyberspace. My desperation led me to his friends. I sent a pleading message to his best friend Mark, a guy I'd always had a friendly rapport with. Hey, have you heard from Oren? I'm so worried. We had a stupid fight and he just left. The reply came back within an hour, but it wasn't the one I'd hoped for. He's with his family, Jez. He's asked for space. I think you should respect that. It was polite, but the message between the lines was clear. We're on his side. Stay away. Humiliated and increasingly terrified, I turned to my own best friend, Chloe. I called her in a flood of tears, carefully curating the story to cast myself in the most favorable light. I was the concerned girlfriend, worried sick about my grieving partner. I told her I'd said something a little harsh, admitting I'd pushed him to be strong, framing my words as a clumsy but well-intentioned attempt at motivation. Chloe listened patiently, letting me exhaust my narrative of victimhood. When I finally finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. I expected her to join my chorus of outrage, to call Oren dramatic. Instead, her voice was quiet and measured. Jez, she began, and the careful tone of her voice immediately put me on edge. What exactly did you say to him? I just told him to be a man about it, to stop crying. I mumbled, the words sounding even uglier when spoken aloud a second time. Another silence, this one was heavier. Oh, Jez, she finally sighed, and there was no sympathy in her voice, only a profound, weary disappointment. You didn't just say something insensitive. You know how he feels about that be a man bullshit? You know how his own father used to say that to him? You didn't just kick him when he was down. You used the very boot you always promised you'd thrown away. You took his deepest, most painful moment of vulnerability and you weaponized the one thing you always secretly held against him, his sensitivity. You didn't just make a mistake. You confirmed his worst fear about you, that deep down you saw his best quality as a defect. Chloe's words were like a bucket of ice water, shocking me out of my self-pitying haze. For the first time, I was forced to see my actions not through my own defensive filter, but through the eyes of someone else. Through Oren's eyes. The final, crushing blow came 2 days later. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was Oren's younger sister, Maya. The message was brutally short and devoid of any pleasantries. Jezebel, Oren has asked me to coordinate a time to get the rest of his things. Specifically his desk, the armchair, and his grandmother's painting. Please let me know what day this week works for you. We will bring our own truck. I stared at the screen, my hands shaking. We will bring our own truck. This wasn't a spontaneous, angry departure anymore. This was a planned, coordinated extraction. He hadn't just run away, he had retreated to his support system, told them everything, and they had closed ranks around him. His family, who had always been so warm and welcoming to me, was now a disciplined unit deployed to dismantle the last remnants of our life together. The fight wasn't between me and Oren anymore. It was me against all of them, and I had already lost. Almost a month passed in that soul-crushing silence. The day Maya and her father came for Oren's things was a masterclass in cold, quiet efficiency. They didn't speak to me beyond polite, one-word answers. They moved with a grim purpose, wrapping the armchair in plastic, carefully taking his Nana's landscape painting off the wall, leaving a pale, ghostly rectangle in its place. I stood by, a useless, invisible ghost in my own home, as they systematically erased the last physical traces of him. His father, a man who had once hugged me warmly at barbecues, wouldn't even meet my eye. The message was clear. I was no longer part of the family. I was the toxic environment they were cleansing. I fell into a routine of obsessive social media stalking. Since Oren's accounts were gone to me, I checked the pages of his friends and family, looking for any sign of him. It was a masochistic ritual, peeling back a scab to see if the wound was still fresh. For weeks there was nothing. Then one evening I saw it, a new post from Mark, his best friend. It was a gallery of photos from a hiking trip in the mountains. The first few were scenic shots, sunlight filtering through tall pines, a rushing river, a panoramic view from a summit. My heart pounded as I swiped, and there he was. The photo was a group shot. Oren was standing with Mark and Maya, his arm around his sister's shoulders. He wasn't smiling, not in the wide, joyful way I remembered. It was a smaller, more subdued expression. But it was the look in his eyes that struck me like a physical blow. It was a look of peace, of release. He looked thinner, the soft edges of his face sharpened by his grief, but he also looked solid. Grounded, the frantic, haunted look from the weeks before was gone, replaced by a quiet resilience I'd never seen in him. He was surrounded by people who loved him, breathing in the clean mountain air, and he was healing. He was healing asterisk away from me. In that single, devastating moment, I finally understood. His departure wasn't a punishment designed to teach me a lesson. It was an act of self-preservation. He hadn't left to hurt me, he had left to save himself. I hadn't just insulted him, I had become the embodiment of the very thing that suffocated him, the rigid, unfeeling expectation of what a man should be. He hadn't just left our apartment, he had escaped the cage of my judgment and was finally, truly, in a safe, supportive environment where he could process his sorrow in his own way. He was becoming the man he was meant to be, not the one I tried to force him to be. The finality of it was absolute, he was never coming back. So now I sit here in this vast, silent apartment, the ghost rectangle on the wall a daily reminder of what I've lost. The air is thick with my regret. I was the architect of my own misery, the one who held the sledgehammer and brought the walls crashing down. I know on an intellectual level that I was wrong, horribly, unforgivably wrong. I took the kindest, most loving man I've ever known, and in his moment of greatest need, I offered him not a hand but a stone. I deserve this quiet, I deserve this emptiness. But even now, in the deepest, most honest corners of my heart, a toxic whisper remains. It's a quiet, insidious voice, the last bastion of my self-delusion. I know I messed up, but if he'd just been a little stronger, if he wasn't so goddamn sensitive about everything, maybe we wouldn't be here. That single stubborn thought proves that Chloe was right. It proves that Oren was right. It's the final, damning piece of evidence that I never truly saw him, and that his escape was not just a choice but a necessity. And it's the reason I know I am truly and deservedly alone.